So next we have Geli Li. Geli Li is an American-based composer whose music straddles both Eastern cultures and Western cultures based upon her original music vocabulary. Her music has been performed nationally and internationally by a panoply of leading artists. She has been guest composer at the Thailand New Music and Arts Symposium, at Portland State University, Oregon Symphony Composition Workshop, and Intimacy of Creativity Chamber Music Festival at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, among many others. She has received awards and prizes in composition competitions more than 10 times. And Geli is a current doctoral student in music composition at the University of Texas at Austin, where she studies with Donald Grantham, Janwiba Tayera, and Yevgeny Shalat. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree from the Central Conservatory of Music in China, where I met her. She also studied music composition at the Hochschule für Musik und Theater Hamburg, Germany, with Elmar Lampson from 2014 to 2015. So welcome, Geli. Geli's talk is called Introduction to and Analysis of Seven Mountains for Solo Piano. So you have 20 minutes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Geli Li. Before I start my talk, let me share my slides with you. I'm not an expert using Google Meeting, but I will try my best. Okay, please let me know if you could see my slider. Is it working?
Yes.
Yes, great, awesome. Okay, great. Thank you, George. Thank you for giving such a, I would say I'm many thanks for being invited in this symposium, that we could share music and thoughts together. And it's my honor that my piece Seven Mountains for solo piano has been selected in this symposium, and I could have this opportunity to discuss my music and the story behind it. Well, George has already given me a perfect brief introduction about myself. It's even better than how I introduced myself, but I could still want to briefly talk a little bit about my background. I'm a composer and I'm a pianist, and I also teach music, and now I'm an assistant instructor of music composition and music theory at the University of Texas, Austin, where I'm pursuing my doctoral degree in music composition. And before I came to the US, I studied at Central Conservatory of Music for my bachelor's and master's degree. And before I came to the US in 2020, I also traveled to Hamburg, Germany to study for a while, to study for a couple of years, and then I moved to the US. I would say, in terms of my repertoire, most of my pieces were composed for acoustic instruments. I wrote chamber music, bunch of chamber music. I wrote orchestra, and now I'm working on my chamber opera and another symphony. But since last year, I would say I've been spending more time and efforts on electronic music, and I also attempt to integrate electronic music elements into my pieces. For instance, like the piece that we're talking today, Seven Mountains, it has two versions. One is for solo piano, and another one is for piano and fixed media. And I will try to talk both versions, and I will show some examples to support my statements. Okay. And the initial inspiration of composing the piece Seven Mountains comes from the sculpture, which untitled actually, but it has a subtitle, which is Seven Mountains. And the sculpture is one of the landmarks exhibited at the campus of the University of Texas at Austin. And it was my honor to engage in the program Sound in Sculpture, which is supported and organized by Texas Performing Arts and Butler School of Music. And in this program, composers are encouraged to write a new piece responding to one particular works of art from this landmark collection. And I appreciate I could contribute a new piece for this specific sculpture I like, the 7 mountains. And before I sat down and composed my music, I read the story about the sculptor, Ursula von Riedensburg. And she is an American-based artist. And according to her biography, she spent the first 8 years of her life in a succession of refugee camps in Germany until 1950, when her family settled in the United States. And when she arrived in New York in 1973, minimalism was at its height. Although she admired the logic and clarity of the movement, she said she still need more expressive and tactile connection to her art. Thus, she joined the new generation of sculptors labeled post-minimalist and conceived her composition as structural repetitions or sequence of basic forms, sculpting them in an intuitive and organic way. Actually, von Riedensburg's story and artistic thoughts attract me a lot, and I found my resonance with her ideas. Just like she talked about her thoughts and how he interpreted post-minimalism. She said like there's like sequence of basic forms and she organized them in an organic way. And her ideas sparked my imagination of texture and sound. And when I was looking at the sculpture, the ways the roots are laid out give me a feeling of a sequence of chords progression. And in my draft, I wrote down this motif-like harmonic structure, which give me a starting point to compose this piece. However, more importantly, actually, when I was performing and trying out this chords on the piano with the sustain pedal, I realized that the sound of the resonance from the vibration of multiple strings is the sonic world I really want to explore further. And actually, I would say since last year, I started to have the idea of exploring the inner world of a vibrating sound. But my ideas become more concrete when I read the article Colliding Resonance. And I found the words from Xiaoyong Chen, he's a German-Chinese composer. And his explanation of the inner world of the vibrating sound inspired me a lot. He said, a sound separates across silence. Following an initial attack, the sound recedes into silence. During the decade, its resonance gradually approaches and crosses the threshold of a different rhyme of a completely new dimension, reveals itself only moments before its final disappearance. And I really like the way he interpreted the song of resonance, and I attempt to articulate this vibrating, or we say the resonant sound in my music. And before I composed the piece 7 Mountains, I have really tried to use this idea on different instruments and media. For instance, like this piece, Long Nights, which I composed for percussion, clarinet, saxophone, and cello. And I create a sonic world of resonance. By using various melodies, or not only using melody, but also like fingers, using banjo picks, using like bows to interact with the percussion instruments, the song of reference has very different shapes and colors. And the percussionist acts to bow the gun and the suspend candle, and also use like a super ball to scrape the surface of the tam-tam, and so forth. And that's my way, or my experiment to explore the vibrating sound, the sound of resonance from the instruments. Also, well, let's give it a listen. I embed the video on my slide. I hope it functions well. But if not, I can also share you with the links. Please let me know if it sounds okay. Okay. Well, I was very encouraged by my experience with the resonance of unpitched percussion instruments. And after this piece, I started to compose the piece Seven Mountains. And in my opinion, the piano is also considered a percussion instrument, technically speaking. And I think if the texture of the chord progression is performed with sustained pedal, the sound and the resonance could be even richer and more colorful than the resonance from an unpitched instrument. So in the piece Seven Mountains, I intentionally designed the use of the sustained pedal along with the continuous chord progression, continuous change chord progressions. And let me show you the score. Okay, great. And as the score indicated, there are many chords played with fermata because I want the pianist really to feel the resonance when he or she is giving the performance and when he or she is like literally interacting with the music. And the resonance, after the initial attack, the resonance is gradually recedes into silence. Additionally, as you can see here, like many places in the score, even when the rest occurs, the system pedal still remains because I want the echoes, I want the sound of vibrating. And the sound of resonance actually serves as an important sonic feature of this piece, which comes from the vibration of strings that are retained by the sustained pedal. Let me ask you, do you think the sound quality was fine with the slide that I just present? Okay, good. Or I should.
If you had a link that you could send, a YouTube link you could send us, we could all listen to it ourselves and then come back when we finished.
Yeah, I think that would be better. I think I have attached the links on the chat, and feel free to check it out, which is the first movement of the piece, which is about a couple of minutes, and we will come back after we listen to it.
Okay, so everyone listen on your own player, and then we'll come back in a couple of minutes.
Okay, I think we have already listened to the piece already, and then I can continue my talk. Great. Well, just like I can't remember what I mentioned. Yes, I believe I mentioned earlier. This piece has two versions. One is for purely acoustic piano, and the other one actually I integrated electronic, I would say, more specifically fixed media into the music. At the very beginning of the piece, it was the first time I tried to use fixed media. The way I use it is like I use different kind of sound treatment to exaggerate the sound of the resonance coming from the acoustic piano. Even though the music materials is almost identical, but because the use of the electronic music, the fixed media, the sonic environment becomes totally different. And that's how I treat the way I take it as like a recap, like how I recycle the same material, but I give it a totally different phrase by using the fixed media part. And I'm going to show you another link, which is the end of the piece, which I integrated the fixed media. It's a very, very short moment, but I think it's rewarding to spend a moment to listen to it. Okay, I have attached the links, and give it a couple minutes, and we'll come back together. Great. Yes, I believe you have already listened to the end of the piece with the fixed media, and now I can move on. Okay, great. And in this piece, I employ some chance elements, and in which the rhythm is not precisely notated. And in the first example here, as the score suggests, the pianist can design the duration of each chord, as well as the tempo, the dynamic, the articulations, and even the emotion. But one thing is very clear is he need to keep the certain pedals, just let it go, because this is one thing. The sonic, this is a feature of the sonic environment that the pianists need to keep it. And the reason that I use this way to notate it is because my purpose is I want to give the performer some freedoms and let he really feel the music, really feel the resonance when he was performing the music. And the music moves as along with his feeling when he is doing this practice. I think this is very, very important for me to actually to fully release the sound of resonance. It's not just like I'm as the composer to control everything, but actually to sometimes to hand off and give the freedom for the performer and let him interpret the music in his way. And the next example it happens at the end of the piece. It's like I use some kind of so-called more advanced and extended techniques. As the score suggests here, the pianist need to use fingertips to do the glissando across the strings inside the piano, and at the same time, he got to use his forearms to just smash the keyboards. At the same time, he got to use the pedal to kind of sustain the echoes and noises and make it like a more complex way. And like moments like this, like I think the most smart way is just relinquish the notation of freedom, because sometimes I would feel 10 seconds is good enough for the resonance, but sometimes I would feel 20 seconds will be the best way. So for this moment, I prefer to just let it be free and let the performer to indicate the details himself at that moment. And this is the end of this piece that we just listened to. It's the end where I embody the fixed medias. Here I recycle the chord progression I used at the very beginning of the piece, but here something is different. Is I divided the phrase into a different way and I mark it as a number, and I let the performer to decide the sequence when he was playing the music. In the electronic music versions, when he was playing this phrases, actually, he is actually interacting with the fixed media. So he put himself into the music and he figured out a way and the logic to end this piece. And in terms of the structure, I use kind of very conventional type, 4 movements. And the first movement is like an introduction, and the second movement is like, let's say, a repetition, but with variations. And the third movement is like more like a transition to an ultrasonic area where we can hear a very clear melody there. And for the fourth movement is more like a recap, which is responding to the beginning of this piece, to the main themes. And the way that I set up the third movement its way is because in the third movement, I had an idea. It was, I want to use my own way to interpret the artist's thought. She said she spent her childhood in the camp in Germany, and she said that memories she could keep forever. That's why when he was doing her compositions, she preferred to use wood. Is because the wood is the material she saw every day when she was in the camp. And her words really attracts me, and that's why I think in the third movement I want to use my way to interpret her feeling. And I would say let's give it a moment to listen to the third movement. And
Geli, I'm aware that I want to make sure that there's enough time for us to talk and interact.
Okay,
so
sorry about it. I think.
Could you use maybe 1 minute to conclude, or maybe just share this last extract with us and then say some concluding words?
Yes, I think I should write up my talk. Thank you for reminding me. Well, I say, just like I mentioned that at the very beginning of this conversations, in my music, I start to thinking about actually the sound. There is a vibration from the strings, or is a noise, or is the melody. Actually, for me, they're all sound materials. and they serve my purpose. But how I compose music is like, I want all these sound materials to for me, they're tools, and I use them at the way that how I interpret my thoughts. And I think this piece is just one of the experiments in my composition journey that I keep to think about. Composing music is organizing the sound in a way, I say in my way, and I'm looking for and I'm researching, exploring my own music vocabulary from the sound. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geli. And Pandalin has just suggested you could put the link of the complete piece in the chat, so we can all go and listen to it later.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Okay, I'll hand over to Andrew.
Hi there.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, thank you very much for that. And actually, it's interesting the contrast, because you seem rather more like my approach, which is to connect up with an artist, and you've clearly connected up with this lady who's made these sculptures, thinking about the wood and thinking about the sound that some of these sculptures may make as well. So that's a very nice connection, and it feels kind of something that I would, for instance, I worked with an artist called Bridget Riley who does all these amazing paintings, and I love the fact that I've tried to connect. I'm never sure whether I'm interpreting what she's done or whether I'm kind of just doing my own thing and finding a way to make that work. So your whole presentation in that sense is fascinating in how you're thinking about those sounds and how they connect with someone else's work as well. I'm very impressed by that. So thank you very much. How do you feel? Do you feel that you're in some ways trying to interpret her sculpture? You mentioned about the connection with the camp that she grew up in and those emotional intensity. Do you feel, are you interpreting her work, and do I make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure, Andrew. Thank you for your words. I would say I'm doing my best to interpret what she thinks about actually not only the very specific sculpture, the Seven Mountains, but also how she views art, or how her artistic philosophy. Let's say that. One thing I really like about her statement is, like, she said, even though she really liked post minimalism, but she said she still want to have her own way from her intuitive and to organize the materials based on her artistic value. And that is something very, very inspiring me, and I learned a lot from that. So in this piece, I try to, let's say, to reinterpret piano texture, because I mentioned very beginning of this presentation, I'm also a pianist. So something very hard is to get out of the force of habit, like don't rely on my fingers anymore. And so in this piece, I seldom use arpeggiated textures, which we see so many arpeggiations in Chopin's piece, let's say it. So instead of using the typical piano textures, I use like a lot of chords texture, because I really love this song after the initial attack of a chord. So I would say, in my opinions, I'm using my way to review something that people think is a norm, just like the artist. People think post-minimalism is like a norm and there's a standard, but she used her way to understanding, to rethink about what it should be. And I think that is how I connect with her thoughts. It's like how I interpret a piano piece. What is a piano piece?
Yeah, to be honest, that's very clear. Thank you very much. And also, it reminds me to also say, I've as a pianist, you're getting away from what I call muscle memory, where there are certain things you do as a pianist that you kind of know, and you're certainly, as you say, not doing the broken chords and the arpeggios and all the rest of it, which may still at some point form part of your work. You never know. Sometimes it's nice to reflect on what you've done as a practical pianist as well. The other side of it is I like the way your scores are open to allowing interpretation from the actual performers, so that rather than just kind of saying this is exactly what I want and this is what you must do, you've allowed quite a lot of freedom in there, which I think really mirrors the way you're thinking about the sculpture and you're thinking about music in general, that you realize as a pianist that you're trying to connect with another performer as well, and allow them to have some input into your work. And that seems to me a very effective way of thinking about music generally, actually. So thank you for that. I mean, are all your pieces, do they incorporate a certain element of allowing the performer some interpretation?
Some of them, I say, for instance, in one of my current pieces composed for violin and viola, and in this piece, I only use one tune, which is the F sharp during the whole piece. But for this piece, I relinquished the control of freedom, just like what I did in the second movement of my piece, because sometimes, let's say, when I play the chord, when I try the chords of the Seven Mountains on piano, sometimes I think whether 10 seconds would be good or 20 seconds. So there's no like a standard answer for how long a chord it should be. So I want to give the freedom for the performer, especially I'm not a violinist and I don't play a viola. So I just let them to design. In this time frame, I give you 30 seconds, like let you to control like what the dynamics, the inner dynamics of these 30 seconds, let's say it.
Yeah. And so have you, for as that example for violin and viola, have you actually heard performances of it or rehearsals of it which feel completely different? How do you feel if someone does somehow something very different from what you may expect in your mind? How do you feel about that?
If be honest with you, if the performance is excellent, musicians always get surprised. But if they somehow misconduct the piece, sometimes would be a strategy, let's say it. But I found out one issue, not necessary problem, is if I relinquish the rhythm controls, sometimes I will lose the tension of music. That's why when I was composing a string quartet, like last month, I back to the way that I give it bar lines. I indicate very precisely how long the tone, the pitch should be, because sometimes I want to keep the tension. So depends on the gesture and the textures of the music. So I think it's changeable.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. That's good. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, let's open it up to a general discussion. Geli, I want to ask you about your fascination with the decay of a vibrating sound. And you shared that quote with us from Chen Xiaoyong. Is it more subtle or more complicated than simply that the sound just continues to diminuendo? Are there things which happen as the sound decays other than simply just a reduction in dynamic? I'm just wondering, from a scientific point of view or from the point of view of acoustics, what is happening when that sound is decaying? Are there some subtle things which you find very attractive?
Is it generally for any instrumentation, or is a question for this very specific piece?
Well, I suppose you started off with exploring this through pitchless percussion instruments, didn't you? But then when you transfer it onto the piano, I suppose with a percussion instrument, then you would have a kind of evolution of the timbre the sound. Do you get the same evolution when you play a chord on the piano and you pay real attention to the way the chord decays?
Yes, I say for me, one of my music philosophy or composition philosophy is I really want to listen into a tune, like really listen into a sound, which means when there's an initial attack, for me, I prefer to just pay very close attention to, let's say, the overtuning, let's say the vibration of the sound, even though there is something that's not on the score necessary, but it's in the environment. And that's very attract me. And also, I really love the question you just asked, like, let's say, after the sound's just decaying and fading away, how can we keep the tension? I think for that part, that's my interpretation to your question, sorry. And I would say, if this is not necessary for a piano solo, but for other instruments, and I think that would be a very good starting point to think about, like when a sound is happens, how can we keep the tension after during the process of fading away? And I think I don't have a short answer for this question, but I would definitely think about it, because I think it's I would say I love this idea.
Well, actually, I think I was being much more literal and simple about it, really, and just interested in how to hear your insight in how you experience the way the sound decays, and does it change? Does the timbre change? Do different partials come out more as the sound decays? I've never spent very much time thinking about this. So
for me, yes, especially if you're listening to the performance in person, I think you will have a more strong feeling about the resonance, and the overtuning comes from inside of the instruments. And I think that is something I didn't see too much from, let's say, classical music. But I would say I want to listen into a tune. That's why I have a sequence of projects which is based on really listen into a sound, regardless if the sound is a vibrating sound or just like one tune or one pitch.
Yeah. Paul has a question.
Yeah, hello. Actually, I just wanted to follow up on what George was asking about there. That actually, I think you were using that change of timbre over the decay in the electronic part of the piece with the fixed media, which I think was very successful in that respect. That it would sort of like capture the resonance of the piano, extend it, but then sort of subtly mutate it. Sometimes you would hear certain overtones would seem to start to evolve out of it a little bit. And so I just was thinking about that as George was asking this question, because I think you were sort of doing that, whether or not you were thinking about it like that. So anyway, I really enjoyed that part of the piece. I thought that piece was really good. And the piece for piano alone is also really very successful, I think. I'm curious, when you say that you leave interpretation open to the pianist as far as timing goes, do you have any notation anywhere, like a little indication that says, listen to the sound until it's just about to disappear? Or like, would you prefer them to let the sound go until it's almost gone? Or is there any kind of indication like that? Or you really just, like, a fermata is totally up to them? There's no, you don't give them any indication of how long it should be? Just curious about that.
Yeah, I would say for this very specific piece, or the very specific moment I put the fermata there, I'm open for unlimited possibilities. So because I don't think I'm holding the only correct answer, like how long the course should be. So, but I open like for the performance to decide it, because they're in the moment. The pianist is in that moment, and he or she is inside the music at that moment. So I think they will have the feeling when they actually interact with the keyboards and playing the chords at that moment, and they decide how long the chords it should be. And I hope that, I believe, as many professional pianists do, they really listen to what they perform. So I believe they will have the determination, like how long the chords should be at that moment for that performance.
Yeah, well, it will be different depending on the piano in the hall too, and
sure.
and the mood of the day and everything else. But
yeah, for sure. I think that is also one of the chance elements, I would say. Depends on the context, like, and the mood, just like you said, how long the chorus is to be. And I'm happy with that for this piece.
Yeah.
Okay. We've come to the end of this session. I don't, unless there's someone who's desperate to ask another question. So I think we'll draw it to a conclusion here. So thank you, Geli, thank you, Zhenhui, for your presentations, and thanks again to Andrew for your wonderful contributions and interaction with the presenters. I really appreciate it. So we have a 10-minute break now, so everyone can go and get a cup of tea or whatever, breakfast in the case of Andrew and Peter. And we'll reconvene in 9 minutes time, actually. So we'll reconvene at 10 past 3 for the next session. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Okay, take good care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.